Well, welcome everybody. My name is Diane Rollman, and I'm a faculty member at the University of Iowa, and I'm also the director of the Healthier Workforce Center of the Midwest. And I know some of you have heard of us, but just briefly, we are a center funded by the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, focused on worker health and safety and how that interacts together. So we are a center of excellence for total worker health. And as one of our initiatives in our new 5-year funding cycle is we are going to be hosting collaborative learning communities. And this is our first one, and we're kicking it off focusing on a topic that we have heard from our partners and our external advisors about something that a lot of employers are dealing with right now. So we're going to be talking about more than just a paycheck, creating a workplace that attracts and retains employees. And I will be starting us off, but then Dr. Beth Livingston, who's in the Tippie College of Business here at the University of Iowa, will take over and moderate things. And we want this to be interactive. That's our whole goal. So please feel free to put information in the chat, and then there's going to be lots of opportunities for everybody to participate going forward. I also want to give a shout out to our scribes who will be taking notes. We've got volunteers, including students, staff, and other people who have jumped in to help us with this, and we really appreciate it. We couldn't do this without their help. So I've already hit record the meeting. So we've been introducing ourselves in the chat. If you just joined and want to go ahead and put your information in there, that would be great. So what are we trying to do today? Well, our main goal is to get together experts and business leaders, and we want to identify practices, best practices and things that you are doing that create a workplace that attracts and retain employees. We've heard a lot about the difficulties of finding people to work and keeping people in the workplace. If we look at the headlines, every day there's another news story out about that. So today we're going to briefly go over how does work influence health and well-being, and then how that in turn impacts recruitment and retention. We're going to talk about different factors that impact recruitment and retention. And then we're going to go into breakout rooms, and we're going to have you guys share with us what's going on in your workplace. What have you done? What are your needs are? What are some of the issues that you've had? And has it worked? And after that, we're going to come back and share out there. So our ultimate goal here is to compile all of this information, and we've been looking in the research side of things, and Libby Presnell, one of our students, has been working this summer on doing that literature review for us. So thank you, Libby. But to come up with best practices and feasible recommendations for employers, and people work in different industries. So we want to make sure that what works in construction may not work in healthcare, may not work in education, and so on. So our agenda is here. We're in our welcome part here, but we're going to spend about 30 minutes sharing information and getting the stage set for where we want to be. And then we're going to, about 3 o'clock, go into breakout rooms. These will be small groups with our scribes. And we have some different questions that we'll share with you to think about what's going on in your workplace. Then we'll come back and we're going to have a discussion where we share what we've learned and other information. And then we'll wrap up and send you on your way. So let's get started here. And I'm going to turn it over to Beth.
Yeah, we're going to do just an initial check-in. So I don't know if any of you all have used Mentimeter before. So if you've used Mentimeter before, you'll know what this is. If not, you literally just have to type in or click on that link in the chat, the menti.com, put that code in. You don't have to create an account or anything. It doesn't track who you are, but this just gives us a sense of checking in. And we're going to ask 3 questions. And so the first question that we have today is, what industry do you work in? And so this will give everybody, I think, a sense. Diane made a very good point that, you know, our solutions are naturally going to vary based on what industry that you're in. And so getting a sense for what industries we have represented here will give you an idea of who we're working with. Great. Thank you. See, so you can already see there's a lot of healthcare folks, academic, higher ed, nonprofits, consulting, engineering, agriculture, lots of great folks. Thank you to everybody who is participating right now. This is great. Thank you. Wonderful. Parks and Recreation. I love that show. Everything. Anybody else? Other? Yes, research. Great. So you can see we have some nice buckets here of different folks in higher ed and research and public health and healthcare, nonprofit work, and other ones considering things like agriculture and engineering, et cetera. Thank you. Our next check, and thank you to everyone who's also posting those in chat. Our next question here, we have 2 questions that will give us a little bit of a snapshot about how much you all are talking about these issues. So when Diane introduced the topics that we were going to talk about today, she made a point and said, these are things you can't barely, who opens up a newspaper, but you can't open up your web browser anymore these days, or look at your aggregated news and not see these topics talked about. So how much are you all currently worried about employee well-being and wellness at your company? I feel like these are terms that have become more in the common parlance ever since the COVID-19 pandemic. But it is always interesting, I think, to see just how prevalent these concerns are across all those different industries that you just shared with us. Anybody else want to register their thoughts here? Awesome, thank you. So if you go to the www.menti.com at the top of that screen and type in that code, you'll have just a little survey. You can click it on your phone or in a browser on your computer right now, and then you can respond to anything that you see. Great, thank you. And I have one more question here, and then we'll use Mentimeter again at the very end for you all to share out final thoughts, which will be a great way to share out some of the things that you've been talking about in your breakout rooms. So I just asked you about well-being and wellness. How much are you all currently worried about retaining employees at your company? Today's conversation is, about retention and recruitment and how those things are connected, but also about the ways in which those issues intersect with concerns about well-being, wellness at work. And I personally, as a business professor, go anywhere without managers and executives pulling me aside and be like, have you figured out how to retain everybody yet? Have you figured out the solution to this problem? And so I think it is interesting to see and important to see that I am not the only one who is hearing this everywhere that we go. Any final folks? So what I think you can see here is that across even all of these different industries that we have represented here, we have a lot of coalescing around the themes of today's talk, right? The concerns about well-being and wellness in the workplace and the concerns about retaining employees. And hopefully we'll set the stage here over the next 15 to 20 minutes about these issues and what the research is telling us about what we should care about, and then going into the breakout rooms where you all will get to learn from one another about what's working, what's not working, what concerns you have, and then final share outs where we'll be able to learn from one another once again. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and re-steal the sharing from me, Diane, if you would like. And we'll go ahead and get started in some of this background information.
Okay, well, as you can see, this is a topic that everybody is interested in. And so let's think about, what does this have to do with health and well-being, And so what we know is that, work has been changing. The last couple of years, that's become obvious. Lots of changes has been going on, new work arrangements with people working remotely or hybrid. We're seeing more technology coming into the workplace, more automation. We also know that the demographics of the workforce are changing. We have, different generations that was already in process there, but people are working longer or trying to start earlier just because of the issues there. The other thing we've noticed is that people have different needs and expectations than they used to have before. There's a more emphasis on work-life balance. That's one of the things the pandemic did when we had to go home. And it's like, I don't know if I want to work all the time. I kind of like being able to be around with my kids a little bit more. We see particularly, though not always, in our newer workers coming into the workforce that they're interested in social and corporate responsibility. So they want employers that, are, thinking about, beyond the workplace there. And, kind of the other buzzwords that we keep hearing are diversity, equity, and inclusion. And those are big topics and very important topics that also play a role in recruitment and retention. At the same time, people are feeling burned out. They're stressed. We hear about the great resignation. We hear about the quiet resignation. These are all factors that are playing a role. And these are, when NIOSH looks at this, they call this the future of work. And these are the issues that are important and they directly impact recruitment and retention. So we know, and we've got lots of research that shows that work impacts health and well-being both positively and negatively. We know that work conditions can lead to risk for injury, illness, or even disability. So when we think about traditional safety in the workplace, a lot of it is focused on reducing the risk for injury and disability. And that definition has become expanded. We also know that work has positive impacts. So wages, we all like to live, to have a place to shelter and to eat. And so we also know that research has shown wages are associated with health and longevity. Most of us get our benefits through the workplace. It impacts where we live and how we commute, how much time we have if we're spending every day in the car or most of our day in the car getting to and from work. So that can impact how much time we have left over to pursue other activities, spend time with our family, exercise, and be involved in relationships. And then work, not only impacts our relationships outside of work, but also our ones inside of work. And these can be both positive and negative on health and well-being. So for example, work influences on health. We know that shift work is one area that has been associated with increased risks for cancer, heart disease, obesity, violence, and strokes. And so that's well known. We also know that it influences our behaviors outside of work, whether we decide to use tobacco. Sometimes you're tired, you come home from work, you just want to lie on the couch and eat potato chips. We may not want to go out and exercise or engage in other healthy things, or we may not have time to, meal prep if we're working all the time or trying to take care of families. And then, think about vacation time here, and this is kind of an interesting statistics is that the average American workers takes less vacation time than a medieval peasant. And so that's kind of shocking when you think about it, because things should be better. We have a lot of things that help us, but it's not happening. So what today we're going to focus on is how that impacts recruitment and retention. And I'm going to turn it back over to Beth.
Thank you, Diane. Yeah, I love that little fun, the fun medieval peasant statistic, right? Because I do think it demonstrates something that I think a lot of us began to understand more during the pandemic, which was how important time was to us and how critical our time was, and the control over our time was to how we feel about work and life. When I talk about issues of recruitment and retention, and I've been teaching human resources to students for 15 years now, and I guess 16 years now, where's time going anymore? And, these issues have always been important, but I'm seeing much more interest from even folks in business who HR isn't their thing. Like, they don't actually do a lot of hiring, like the active, roles of hiring, or they're not the people who are going over the books of the cost of turnover, but they're talking about these issues more. The fact that it's difficult to find the people to do the jobs that need to get done. And I'm seeing this in a lot of small businesses and in a lot of industries that haven't thought about this a lot, right? Have often had more people who want to work at their organization than they were able to employ. And now they're thinking about this in a much different way. And so today we want to talk about how issues of recruitment and retention really go hand in hand. So what is recruitment? Recruitment is when you're trying to get a new person in the door. So how do you encourage them to apply? But also, how do you make them feel attracted to this organization. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. But this is related to retention as well, right? Once you get people on the door, you have to figure out how to keep them there, and maintaining the current employees that you have. Also, then if you're not very good at that, it just means you need to recruit more. And so this becomes a cycle, which many companies are realizing now in the work that didn't go in or that didn't happen sometimes during the pandemic, or, got hit with the Great Resignation, or people who became ill due to the pandemic, who are now noticing that their recruitment budgets have gone up and the amount of attention they have to spend on recruitment has increased. And so these things are part and parcel with one another, and that's why we want to talk about them in conjunction with one another today. So we can move on. One of the reasons that recruitment and retention are such an important issue is that turnover is very costly. This seems, I talk about this so often, it seems trite to me, but I think it's incredibly important that we actually say these things out loud. It's, from an organizational perspective, I always find myself toggling back and forth toward, it's one reason I really like working with the Healthier Workforce Center, because it encourages me to do this back and forth between, well, what is good for an employee and what are the concerns of the employers, and finding the ways in which we can find those overlaps and what employees need and what companies are able to give them. The cost of turnover is something that a lot of organizations overlook, particularly if you are not actually doing the work of hiring every single day. So just on the face of it, replacing an employee can cost between 50 to 60% of that employee's salary. Overall costs can range between 90 to 200% of the annual salary of the employee that you're trying to replace. Look at that orange box. You can see just in 1 month how many workers quit their jobs, and you can get a sense for how costly this can become to replace them. Whenever I talk about the costs of turnover, I think it's important to understand, that it's not just that slide up there of, it's 200%. It's really important to think in real terms what that means. Yeah, thank you. Because most of these costs are unseen, right? You can say, oh, well, it's free to post the job on LinkedIn. And, yeah, I have a recruiter, but I'm paying them to do that job anyway. So how much time are they actually spending recruiting? But if you go and you ask the people who are doing the recruiting today, whether you've outsourced HR to some other firm or you're doing it in-house, it's a lot of time to sort through applicants. It's a lot of time to interview people, then to onboard them, to get them into the position. And then what's really important to realize is all the time that those positions are left open, that is costing the organization as well. Employees are having to do double the work that they had to do before. That's a threat to them possibly leaving, but also means those jobs are not getting done as quickly or as well because you're overburdening the employees you have. You aren't able to take the risks and innovate the way you want to because you don't have the personnel that you need to do that. And there's also the fact that once this person is hired and brought in, to be able to get to the point where they can replace the person who left, it often sometimes takes years. And so I think when I talk to organizations about this, I talk about the risk of not caring about retention. It's not just about the cost of posting an ad and interviewing people. It's all those opportunity costs that you can't, as an organization, be as flexible and as agile as you want to be because you don't have the personnel that can help you to do that. So this is one reason that we want to understand the factors that impact recruitment and retention. And our lens, as Diane, as a public health scholar, and us at the Healthier Workforce Center, has led us to really focus on how workplace health and safety have played a role in recruitment and retention efforts. This has never been more apparent than during the pandemic. You've people talking about risks to health and safety in ways that I have not seen happen in all my years of working with organizations around these topics. But it also means it's an opportunity for us to be educated on what these opportunities are. So one of the reasons this matters is because, as Diane alluded to at the very beginning of this conversation, the workforce is changing. Why does this matter so much? Well, it matters because the ways in which we always used to do things, right? The ways in which we rewarded people, the way we recruited people, the way we retained people will naturally shift because the composition of the workforce has shifted. And so, we see, for instance, burnout, stress, the ergonomics of desks and chairs, all of these, issues that I can tell you that for 15 years of talking to companies, I have never heard as many people talk about issues like burnout and work-family conflict and, safety and health and sickness and whether people are able to be as productive when they're ill. All of those issues I'm hearing managers who are not in the health and safety and public health space talk about, which means this is an opportunity to continue to say, well, how pertinent are these issues to our ability to attract employees, but also retain them? Family responsibilities change over time. Younger workers, older workers, sandwich generation, you have children, you have aging parents to care for. You care about health and safety in different ways. You care about, what keeps you in a job is different. The trajectories of change as you age also differs. And those are important issues to remember when we talk about, well, what attracts people to a job and what keeps them. And with that, let's talk just a little bit about the functions of recruitment and retention before we go into our breakout rooms. So when I talk about recruitment, it's important to think beyond just, oh, well, it's an ad on LinkedIn or Indeed or whatever the online function that you have, or you've posted on an internal message board in your institution. Recruitment is truly a multifaceted a function of human resources. And it refers to a set of activities that's designed to both identify potential employees and attract them. In this way, it's similar to marketing for those of you who are in marketing among us, right? It's how do we make people want to come and join us? And I like to talk about 3 goals associated with this. First, you want to attract a lot of people to apply. But you want to make sure that you're also attracting people who fit the position, whatever that looks like, whether they have the requisite abilities to be able to do the job. But the third one here is also important, which is you want to increase the likelihood that people will accept your job offer. And that is something that a lot of organizations forget when they're crafting their recruitment policies. They think, I just need to make our company look as best as possible. And so I get a lot of applications and surely I can just choose among these applicants, without thinking about the fact that the recruitment process is about fit from both sides. And at the end of the day, your employee still has to, or your potential employee still has to accept your offer when you make it. When I think about, or when I talk about recruitment and retention, I like to use this, and let's put up the whole thing at once and then I can talk through it. I know we have Diane's awesome animation here, but I'll just talk about it all at once so you can take it all in. When I talk about recruitment, what I'm talking about here with applicants that fit the position are applicants who are able to fit what the employee needs. And so if you look at the top of this, you'll see the employee comes in with a certain level of knowledge, skills, and abilities, a certain amount of motivation and effort that only that employee knows what they're willing to put into it, and certain types of behaviors that they're willing to engage in. But the employer is coming in with a set of expectations about what it takes to fill that job. What knowledge, skills, abilities will it take? How motivated do I need someone to be? What behaviors do I want them to enact? When those things match up, you get good job performance. And it's important. This is one reason why during the recruitment process, you see a lot of employers trying to figure out, well, how much knowledge do you have, right? Are you motivated to do this job? But you can't get good job performance if the employee is not a good fit for that job, which is why it's important to really suss out the true skills and not just say, well, we're all trying to make ourselves look good, right? And it's one reason I often encourage employers to really think about what the job needs and don't just say, oh, 5 years of experience, if 5 years of experience isn't actually going to make someone perform better at that job. Because then all it does is it cuts your number of applicants down and it makes it more likely that you're going to make an error in terms of the person who will fit that job. The retention part, this bottom half, I think is equally important. Once you have this job offer on the table, once you have someone come into the organization, you have a certain level of benefits and needs and employee desires that the organization must provide. So certain levels of compensation. There was a great comment in the chat earlier about how wages are not just what employees need to survive, but they can also be important symbols and signals that your employer cares about you. It's one reason why sometimes, right, like the companies know this, they'll provide nominal raises. I'm going to give a 1% raise, which doesn't even keep up with inflation, but is just trying to signal that we value and care about you, right? We know that wages and rewards have these sort of symbols. Employees also have a type of work. We've seen this a lot with issues of remote work lately, where there have been employees who are like, no, this is the type of job I want. I want to work remotely. And I've been working with a lot of companies who that's very difficult for them to wrap their heads around. And we're having a lot of conversations about that. There's also social environment. Do you want to be in a place where you're one big happy family, or do you really want no one to ask you about your life outside of work ever? And it's important that we find those sorts of matches, because if you're in a place where you're like, please leave me alone, I'm an introvert, I do not want to talk about my life about this stuff, and you're in a place where your boss is always, well, how's your life? How's your family? It can become untenable after a while. And if you don't have those things matched, then you have job dissatisfaction and people are more likely to leave, which I'll demonstrate on the next slide. The next slide here, I mentioned that when people are dissatisfied with their job, they're more likely to leave. And indeed, this is one of the biggest things that we know in all of the management and HR literature, is that job satisfaction and its companion of organizational commitment are some of the biggest predictors about whether someone leaves. You don't let people tell you, oh, job satisfaction doesn't matter. Absolutely. The whether people like what they're doing and are generally satisfied at their job absolutely matters. There are lots of components to that, including the people you work with, the people you work for, etc. But overall, if people like what they're doing, they're much less likely to leave. However, as we'll see from the rest of this model, if people are not committed to their job or dissatisfied, the first step that our literature demonstrates that people do is they start thinking about leaving. So how many of you in this room, right, who have left a prior job or considering leaving your current job have started to think, you get dissatisfied and you start to think, I wonder if another job would be better for me. I wonder if there's another job out there. I wonder what that job would look like. You start to do those withdrawal cognition. You start to think about leaving and withdrawing from your job. In fact, I don't know how many of you all follow like the news, but you've seen this quiet quitting thing. Tell me, anybody in the chat, have you seen this discussion of quiet quitting? Which is hilarious because we study this and we're like, well, going above and beyond is not supposed to be part of the actual job. It's something we call organizational citizenship, which is not, it's by definition not part of the job description. But regardless, they're not really talking to us as researchers. They're talking to people, right? They're doing their own sort of journalistic conversations about this. But really, this is about withdrawing from jobs. People are starting to they're quiet quitting in that they're in this first stage, right? Like it's not quiet quitting so much as that I'm starting to withdraw from my job because I'm dissatisfied. I'm not happy either with the pay or the people or what I'm doing with my life or with how they respect my well-being and my health. And so these are those first steps towards turnover. And we look at the rest of this model, we see what happens next. Yeah, there we go, right? The next step here is once you start thinking about it, you're like, well, maybe I'll just open up Indeed today and we'll see. Or maybe I'll just click that I'm looking on LinkedIn and see what comes through, right? You start this initial job search, which of course leads to the last components here, which is you then compare these alternatives you have to the job you have already. And if, those alternatives compare better, well, then we get to turnover, which is the last one here, right? The important thing to remember here is that it all starts with a sort of internal assessment. Well, how do I feel about what I'm doing? And this is where we often focus a lot of our interventions in the organizations, which is you've got to step in here up at the top. Once they've already mentally withdrawn from their job and start looking for other things, they're halfway out the door already. And that's a much harder battle to wage. But this is not all that we know. So that is the very logical, drawn out, oh, I don't like what I'm doing. Maybe I should go somewhere else. But that's not the only reason that people leave. And one of the things that we've seen during the Great Resignation during COVID is this expanded model of turnover that's very clear. So if you look at this top here, what you'll see is this is what the model I just showed you. There's no real shock. It's just this general, I have low satisfaction. I begin searching for other jobs. It's that top thing, right? The slow, thoughtful model. But that's not the only reason people leave. Sometimes there are shocks that happens, right? Or there are opportunities where people leave when they don't have anything else. And this is what we call the Great Resignation, right? Which was, I'm generally dissatisfied. I don't even know if there's another job out there for me, but I just can't do this anymore. I can't, right? There has to be more to life than what I'm going through. And that was so shocking to a lot of people who were still in that prior slide phase, which were like, surely it's illogical to leave a job without another alternative. What you saw was people's, really recalibrating what mattered to them and really thinking about their well-being and health in ways they hadn't thought about before. But there are also opportunities where people leave jobs because shocks happen. Sometimes those shocks happen. You're already dissatisfied with your job. You're already not super happy, right? But you would have stayed. But then the shock happens and you're like, nope, this is a sign, right? After what happened, I started to think maybe this isn't the right place for me. Sometimes we see this happen if somebody gets injured on the job and you're like, whoa, wait a second. I didn't realize just how dangerous this job was. Maybe this isn't right for me. Or maybe the management's approach to that or reaction to that injury made you feel like perhaps you aren't as respected as you would like to be. But also sometimes shocks occur in such a way that they don't even allow you really loved your job. You thought you really liked it here, but you just can't possibly stay. Sometimes this means there's because there's a death in the family or there's an opportunity, to take another job, right? They offer you a lot more money and you're like, it's not that I don't like this place, but who could pass this up? And sometimes it has to do with negative things like bullying or sexual harassment. There's some major negative shock that happens and it's so shocking. You're like, I'm done. This is important because when companies only focus on job satisfaction issues, they can miss these things. And this is what has happened during COVID, is a lot of companies have missed the fact that shocks can lead people to rethink and recalibrate their desire to stay in the jobs that they have. So what does worker well-being have to do with recruitment and retention? We'll hope you could see it, right, as we were talking through these things, but just to make it very, very clear, businesses are increasingly considering worker health and well-being, and not just as an aside, although we've seen in the last decade more money going in companies towards workplace wellness issues, et cetera. Many of you are in that space, so you know what I'm talking about. But I am seeing much more conversation about this at a strategic level in organizations, meaning I'm seeing leadership saying, wait a second, we have to care about this issue of burnout. And I see it in some industries more so than others, which I hope you all bring out in your breakout rooms because we'll want to hear it. We're also seeing these issues of real worker well-being come out when we talk about issues of DEI or diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is about fundamental respect, right, and opportunity, and we know the costs of to health and well-being for discrimination, racial discrimination, for instance. We also know and seen these conversations come up in our discussion around essential workers, and particularly when we've been talking during this entire pandemic. I mean, I can't go anywhere without talking. We need to talk about nurses and we need to talk about teachers. We need to talk about nurses. We need to talk about teachers, because these are the jobs that are not just about health and safety, because of course you're talking about illness and being front facing and not being able to have as much time away from the job in the face of illness, but also the fact that, these are jobs where burnout and stress have become such a major part of our conversation. And it sounds sort of counterintuitive, but I'm glad that we're having these very difficult conversations, because we're hearing people say, well, wait a second, maybe it's not just about how well do you do the job, right? Maybe it's also how do you feel while doing it? And maybe that matters. And if we have to have the conversation, because if I have to say to a business, you should care about this because it will cost you money, but it ends up in more attention being paid to worker well-being, then it's a win in the end. So does focusing on worker safety actually affect productivity and retention? Does this actually work? You may not be surprised by the fact that I say yes, right? Of course it works. And I'm going to share you just a short little case about that before we go into our breakout rooms, which we just have a couple slides here before we do. So there's a wonderful case by Robin Ely, who's a professor at Harvard Business School, wonderful person. And she has a great articles, and we'll share this out, an article about this out after to all the registrants after the meeting. But what happened is there are these oil rigs off the coast of the Gulf of Mexico, off the coast of Louisiana. Those of you who are familiar with those jobs know that they're seasonal jobs. People go and they work off site on the oil rig offshore for a period of months. And oftentimes for workers in these industries, these are the jobs they work for that period of time. And then, that is their annual pay. And then they're off for a certain period of time. And so what these oil rigs were doing at the time was starting to change some of their safety procedures. And so they started to say, well, how can we change our safety culture? Those of you who follow these sorts of issues know how dangerous working on an oil rig can be. There are explosions, there are oil spills, right? Fires, of course, and plus you're in the middle of the ocean, right? It makes it much more difficult to get help for general safety and health well-being. And so the culture change they put into place was something called Safety 2000. And so rig workers were trained to put safety above their image, to speak up every time. So there was a bumpy helicopter ride, obviously, to get back and forth between things, just saying, I don't feel safe, right? They tried to say, well, what's going on? Why did they not feel safe? Examples, a team member who returned to work only a few days after his daughter had been shot at. He said, I'm dealing with this at home. People were supportive of him. So again, making this a safer place to talk about both mental and physical well-being. Another story that I think is really important is they empowered even the most low-level employees, the cooks, right, the janitorial staff on these oil rigs, to speak up when they saw violations of safety occurring. So if the general manager of the rig were walking down the steps and not holding on, mind you, this is on the sea, right? So not holding on to the handle because it's unsafe when you're floating in the middle of the ocean, they could say, hey, you're not wearing your hard hat, or hold on to. They could speak up, and they weren't going to be reprimanded or experience backlash for that, which was a huge opportunity to demonstrate that we really truly live our safety values. And though that was the broader cultural change that these organizations put into place on this oil rig. And Robin Ely and her team went out to study it. In fact, they even installed a research assistant who lived on the oil rig to watch and learn and interview people who worked there. So what was the effect here? Well, first of all, there was a decline in the company's accident rate by 84%. Productivity increased, efficiency or cost per barrel increased, reliability exceeded the industry's previous benchmark. But here are two important things that came of this that I want to highlight. First of all, better recruiting and retention. Everybody wanted to work on this site. Everybody, because employees are not stupid. They know how dangerous jobs are. You work in construction, you work in, how dangerous these jobs are. And you do them because you love them, because it pays well, because it's what you do well, but you know how dangerous they are. And so seeing the decline in accident rate, the next year, everybody wanted to apply there. Because if you were going to go and work, you wanted to know you were going to come home whole and well. Right. And it became a very big marketing tool and recruitment tool for the company that had put into place this safety culture change. And the people who went back were like, sign me up again. They would sign on to longer term contracts because of that. The second potentially unexpected outcome here was actually better gender equity on these oil rigs that had gone through this safety change. And this is the most fascinating part in Robin's work that she comes in, because she demonstrates that, this comfort with vulnerability, this non-mocking and lack of backlash for people who are speaking up and empowering everyone on these equal terms, allowed men to deconstruct really toxic gender norms. Just so you all are aware, one of the fun facts about sexual harassment laws, of course, we don't have a law in the United States that says sexual harassment is illegal. Most of that is built around Civil Rights Act about gender discrimination and case law. One of the biggest cases that established that men could be targets of sexual harassment was on an oil rig, right? And he was both assaulted and harassed. And it was a very important demonstration of just how dangerous these things can be for men who don't live up to specific norms around gender. And so the fact that these change in safety culture could not only improve performance, but also improve retention and gender equity demonstrates how critically important health and safety norms can be. All right. So now we are going to start to turn it over to you. Diane mentioned that one of the main things that we've been trying to do as we move into this new next 5 years of the Healthier Workforce Center is trying to take advantage of the opportunity of all of you, right? We have such a great community of people who are interested in these topics. You have knowledge that we don't always have. I can only know what people tell me. And so this is a great opportunity for us to learn from you, and from one another, and then to report out so you can learn all of these sort of best practices and things that are going on, which I will also help to contextualize, and Diane will when we come back. So we're going to go to a breakout discussion. You'll have a scribe in your room who will help manage you through these issues. No worries. But the first thing you're going to do is introduce yourself, so that you all can get a sense for what industry you're in, etc. The second question you're going to talk about is if you're having recruitment or retention issues. We did that check-in and Mentimeter. Many of you are talking about these things. What do you think the causes are in your particular organization or industry? And then given those concerns, what are some practices and policies that you have either instituted in your company or have you considered implementing to address these issues? And then when we come back, we're going to share them out. We're going to talk about these things, and then we will disseminate a white paper at the end of this, hopefully, that will share out these issues. Diane, did I miss anything?
Nope, great job. So at this point, I'm going to open up the breakout rooms, and once you get in there, there's a scribe, and then we have members from the Healthier Workforce Center. I'm going to ask you to help lead the discussion, and we will work through this and give you some time to talk about it. Any questions? I will be out here waiting, and we will go ahead and see you back in a little bit here.
Back again already? Look at us. Isn't it amazing how fast it goes? Like, you're having a good conversation and you're like, wait, were we in there for a half hour or what? It seems when you see the agenda, you're like, no way we'll have to talk that long. And then you do. At least I know I was.
Well, I heard some good things, so that was.
Me too. And so I think that's where we're gonna do some share outs now. Is that right, Diane? That's where we are?
We are.
So we can do this so I am going to end the session with a Mentimeter share out where people can kind of type in some thoughts so you guys can see it on the screen, which I do think helps. But for the purposes of the collaborative learning community that we're all learning from each other, would love if folks have, some of your concerns let's start with that question, which are what are some big, one big concern that about turnover and retention and recruitment and retention, I should say, that came out of your groups. And you can just unmute and talk if there's someone who would like to talk.
I think one of the things that came out of ours was, where are the people going to come from? A metric was shared about how many people are actively looking for jobs in the state of Iowa, and it's way less than what we got. So, where are they going to come from? What are we going to do?
Yeah, it was a really good conversation about how do you motivate disaffected folks who've left the workforce, right, to come back? Like, what is it? The understanding that, the great resignation or whatever you want to call it, like understanding that more, right, is like asking those questions, which I think is a really important thing. So we just don't know a lot of what's going to convince people to come back. And I think there has to be a conversation about that, right? Other groups? Thank you, Rich. Anyone?
We had a lot of nonprofits in our group, so we really talked about just like how much we're able to pay and how much we're able to be flexible, even with like the work-life balance, I think was a big thing.
Yeah, I mean, so are you saying kind of the idea of what to be good recruitment tools or good retention tools may not be tools you have in your toolbox?
Right. Yeah.
It's not an uncommon situation. We talked a lot about that too, about pay, right? Which is, well, what if you can't? What do you do? Like, how do we have those conversations? And they're tough conversations to have, right? Other groups, thank you.
I think, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Nope. You go.
Some members of our group pointed out that pay was more important than benefits for employees in large part because people are trying to make ends meet. It's a tough economy now, and people don't realize the importance of their benefits until they need them.
Ooh, that's a great quote, right? You don't often understand the importance of your benefits until you need them. It's a really important thing to talk about. And I also think you make a really great point. In recruitment, sometimes they'll talk about like, oh, pay doesn't matter. That pay matters a lot to people. Don't let anybody tell you that pay doesn't matter. I know you all know that, but sometimes that's one of those like little fun facts you hear people talk about HR. People do care about pay a lot. Money is very motivational. That may seem very straightforward to you, but it's one of those common things that when I ask my students, I'm like, oh, people won't leave good jobs for better pay. And they're like, no, I wouldn't do that. It's like a moral thing. I care more about it. I'm like, no, like people do, like that's what they do. Right. And I think it's really important that we acknowledge these things so that we don't go into these battles like unknowledgeable about that. Like, yes, right. You may not be able to compete on that, but it's important to understand that yes, money is very motivational. I'm sure I'm just preaching to the choir here, but for a lot of people, they think about themselves. Well, I wouldn't do that, but they would. In often cases. And that's particularly true, as Brad, you point out, like we are in a difficult economy, inflation, like there's a lot of question marks as to what costs will be moving forward, and people are, whenever there's uncertainty, one thing you can hold on to is, well, at least I can save money. And that's a very important, at the very least, to understand what your employees are thinking, to understand that this is how they feel and to honor their uncertainty and figure out how you can help them manage uncertainty, even if you can't always offer them more pay. Other thoughts? These are great. And do feel free to post in chat if you can't unmute. If you're not in a place where you can unmute, you can absolutely post in chat too. Diane, did you have thoughts from things that you were hearing?
Yeah, I think some of the, in some industries you can raise wages, but in others, I think I've heard from some nonprofits that it's really hard because you just don't have the extra money. So that's a big issue. Another comment, and jump in if I'm speaking for you, is you don't want to poach employees from other people. If it's a small industry and stuff, that definitely can play a role. And I think that there's a lot of competition for entry-level positions. So, people can kind of try out different workplaces and maybe move around pretty easily, which means you may get them hired, but they may not stay there.
Yeah. And thank you. And one of the things that came up in our group that I thought was really a poignant point, which is, when money is all you're offering someone to stay there, then there's no other reason for them to stay there anyway. So I think, and this is something that I know I've been talking to companies who have moved towards more remote work and they're having trouble. How do we build connections and reduce isolation among our employees? How do we build teams that trust each other, that work well together? And I do think it's not just remote work. This is happening, I think, everywhere. Like we were talking about nursing, right? Are you just being assigned to a different unit all the time? Are you actually building teams that trust each other, that respect each other, that work well together? A lot of movement towards project-based work in a lot of different industries has not really focused on how do you build connections among people, which is what keeps a lot of people in jobs, which is, if the change in pay is nominal based on the disruption to my life, what's keeping me is my connections to other people, like my feelings of loyalty, my feelings of trust and respect in a position. And I do think that it's important, particularly if you're in an industry where your ability to pay more people is just not there, right? You're in nonprofit, you're in a small firm, like you just don't have the slack that you may wish that you had, that you're not forgetting the fact that there are also basic psychological components of jobs that people work for lots of reasons. I'm sure if you all think about yourself and what you like and don't like about your current jobs, you can think about those things, right? Do I feel like am I respected? Does my boss trust me? Do I have connections with these people where we work with one another and we trust each other and we can have positive conflict with each other? So I know, that I can trust these people. And that's been a big issue with moving towards remote work, is how do you continue to build those connections when you're not co-located? But it's not only remote workers who are dealing with it.
You know, I have the advantage of looking at the notes, and I don't know if Michelle Anderson is here. If you want to talk a little bit, put you on the spot.
Yes, Michelle, great stuff that she was sharing in our group.
What specifically do you want to put me on the spot about? Sorry.
Well, just the having the need for, you know, you're working in a hospital situation, so you need nurses, and they need to be licensed as well as lab techs. And the fact that there's no workforce, you know, people who have those skills.
Right.
So
it is a very interesting. We talked about it a lot in my group. I don't have an answer. We're always coming up with different things that we can do. Like I shared, we did the Prescini poll survey, and we have great environment, and they like each other, and it's great morale. So that's great, because that's not always that way. I do agree with Beth. You have to have a group. You have to have that feeling of a group. I also agree with her that over the years, because people have been talking about nursing forever. Again, like I said, when I became a nurse when I was 22, they told me that it was going to be the worst shortage ever. And well, it's even worse than that. And so I think that it is like, well, we'll just send them here, there, and everywhere because they're licensed, and we can just throw you in there. And the problem with that is that everybody got used to that. Like even now, I could walk into a med surg floor or an ER and really any hospital, and I would be fine. Show me where the supplies are. The patients are the same, right? So it's like you made the nurses. So it's like, well, whatever. I'm not connected. That's not my best friend at work. We're not going to go out after work and talk about our kids. So I can work anywhere. So, and money does matter. Money matters a lot. So what do we do about it? I'm not really sure. What we started doing a lot, like we have something coming up this fall. It's called Passion for Healthcare, or Find Your Passion for Healthcare. We're starting clear down to 7th grade now. And we don't do death by PowerPoint. So we do it all hands-on. So we go outside. If they're young, they're already in school, they don't want to see that. We go outside. We start with EMS and those kinds of things, trying to get them into it. But it's hard for us where some of the places, like my son did a work study, he went into HVAC, which is so needed. A lot of the trade schools are, but he worked for somebody during school. We can't do that. They have to be licensed. Like it is just a hard thing. So we're hoping by doing something like this will spark somebody's interest. But for retention, we are actually working more on retention than recruitment, because, and I know everybody has a problem, but at least in Iowa, every place is offering $10,000 sign-on bonus. Everybody's offering incentive pays that are ridiculous, you know. So now we're just focusing more on retention. What can we do for our employees that are here that stayed through all of this? To say thank you for doing that. And then maybe they'll tell some friends. So that's really, but it is just a scary place, just in the world in general. And I can't remember which guy in our group said that it's scary that, you know, the cost of living is so expensive and some people can't afford to live, but then, so you hire a couple of people for way more than you should. And then it becomes this perpetual wheel of a huge issue. Mm-hmm. So, because, you know, giving them a raise is great. And we did that. It used to be a cost of living raise, and now it's not even close to a cost of living, right? You know, with the gas and groceries and things at the cost they are. And just like everybody here, I'm sure in every industry, I mean, to do a medication now is 5 times, and we don't get paid anymore from the health insurances. So it's just, and everybody's like this, you know, the margins become smaller, and how do you keep going? I'm not sure. So I don't know. It's interesting. I'll be interested to hear. I'm going to connect with Beth a little bit on her HR experience after this call. So I'm glad this came across my desk so I could look at it. I usually talk to nurses, so I really appreciated people that were not in the healthcare industry.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, Beth, how many are concerned about training and workforce development? Because we've also heard that too, about, you know, creating those pipelines. I thought, Michelle, that going down to 7th grade, it used to be, you know, college, then, you know, community college, then high school. But is
there's short and long-term concerns here, right? And I think right now people are still in a very reactionary phase because we're still feeling very unsettled by everything that's going on. And I think I don't see so many places in proactive mode, like thinking what's 5 years down the road going to be. And so I applaud you, Michelle, for thinking. I mean, you don't really have much of a choice in terms of yourself, but you really have to do this sort of work. But that's the long-term part of it, right? Which is, okay, we need to think long-term. Most of the people I'm talking to are being very, very reactive still, which is, oh no, we have no idea what's happening. And we're just hanging on with our fingernails right now and trying to figure out. And that managing from a place of uncertainty and fear can be a very dangerous place to manage from, because you're not being very creative and innovative. You're holding on to the bare minimum you have to. And sometimes that means all this other sort of stuff that speaks to human psychology gets left behind, right? To wellness, to well-being. It becomes, no, we just have to do the job, because if we don't, pull in this contract, we're not gonna be able to pay anybody. And like, we'll think about all that stuff later. But that worked for about 8 or 9 months during the beginning of COVID, when everybody was reactionary. And then people got a lot more time to think about their lives and wanted to say, well, how does this fit in to how I want to be treated, to how I feel? And I posted a video at the very beginning of the pandemic saying, I mean, literally a week into the pandemic. And I was like, you all, companies that are not reacting with respect to your employees right now, like, you're not worried about losing them, but as soon as this initial like wave is over, they will leave, because they will remember how you treated them, and it will sit on their hearts and stew. And you never want, resentment is like the worst emotion you want your employees to feel, but that's what they will feel. And I hate to say it came true for so many places, but it did. And so now how do we go through the culture change? Like, how do we do those things? And I know Rich in our group, he brought up the idea of, like, he does, instead of exit interviews, they do stay interviews. Why are you staying? Right. And what a great way to think about, how do we think about our employees, like, and demonstrate our care for them in a way, which I think is a great idea.
Go ahead, Lauren.
Sorry, I was going to just chime in. Beth was talking about managers a little bit, and I do think that that is such a crucial piece of this puzzle. And we talked a lot in our breakout room regarding the option for people to work remotely, and I don't think a lot of managers are really trained on how to handle a remote staff, or how do you keep people connected or sort of lead in this different environment. So I do think that that needs to be top of mind for folks. If you are changing as a culture, or the types of benefits and policies that you're implementing, you need to make sure that the managers are ready to handle that and can really lead confidently and with empathy, as we know that that really contributes to the employee experience.
A great point about, I mean, just the roles we all play in this, right? Like, and thinking about what that means for what our strategies moving forward are, which is, I think, hard to sometimes conceptualize and think about. Thank you, Lauren. And other thoughts? These are really, I mean, I can't believe it's already been, it's 4:05 already. And I think we haven't had as much drop off, which is great. I think I really want to hear more about, I brought up the stay interviews thing, which is a great idea, Rich. And if you have any components about that you'd like to share in chat, I think there's a lot of people who would love to hear the sorts of questions you ask, which we talked a little bit about in our group. But let's switch that a little bit, and let's start to move into, what sort of policies have you thought about? What have you done any that have worked, have not worked? That, Michelle mentioned how some of these long-term recruitment policies that they're putting in place. What about you? What are you all doing? Any scribes can share out, or anybody else can unmute. Anybody? I think there's lots of stuff we've been thinking about. Brad?
Yeah, well, I think the rest of my group members, I think, are shy, but they had a lot of really good input. I think a point that came up several times was how critically important training supervisors is. A lot of people don't receive adequate training in order to be able to treat people with empathy, and how to have the skills to know and how to motivate people. As one of our participants said, people often leave their boss rather than their organization. and that HR should be the last resort, not the first. You should, if you learn people skills and how to be a good manager, you can avoid having to end up in the HR office. But I think an important,
You know me, I'm an HR person, so I'm taking offense to that, Brad. No, I'm just kidding.
Well,
Just kidding.
but I think a really important point came up here is that although training is critically important, you have to give people enough time to do professional development.
Mhm.
And the trick here is how do you make training on professional development seem like a benefit rather than seeming like another burden, I think, which is another great point that came out of our group. And there was a need expressed for short management training tools. So 2-minute videos would be ideal, or like 15 tops, to help people, sort of busy managers learn the skills.
That's wonderful. Thank you to Brad's group for providing good stuff.
We had a great group.
And I'm sorry, Wharton. I don't know what your first name is because I just said sorry. So, but
No,
go
no,
ahead.
that's fine. My name is Lindsay.
Okay, Lindsay. Go
I
ahead,
was
sorry.
just adding to that. That's actually like my biggest passion is that you have the right managers and supervisors, because I think the feeling that someone has is such an important part of their job. And when you have a supervisor or manager that makes you feel like you're walking on eggshells, or you don't feel like you're doing a very good job, that's going to make you want to leave your job. And that's what I do, is I listen to employees' concerns a lot of times. And that is like the number one thing, is they just don't feel like they are valued by their supervisor or their manager. So I just think that that's like the big human part of retention that a lot of people miss.
Thank you, Lindsay. I think it's no surprise that I agree with you on that, considering my whole, area of the things that I focus on. But I do agree with you. I think one thing that, as someone who studies remote work and diversity, equity, and inclusion issues, where the overlap here is that people want to be respected and they want control over their time, to be treated like grownups, right? That know, how to do things. And I think one of the things that I've seen in this reactionary moment has been, I'm nervous, I'm uncertain, I'm scared. And so I need to control things, right? I need to see you all the time. I need to, right? And this is not just because not every job can be done remotely, right? But it's still in how you deal, in how you managers are having these conversations, like the way you treat people. And I mentioned resentment before. And once employees start resenting their boss or their workplace, it's really hard to come back from that, right? I presented that the withdrawal turnover thing. The reason that matters is because the further you get in that cycle, the harder it is to turn it around, right? And asking good questions. That's why I like the stay interview stuff so much, is, ask questions. I know a lot of folks at companies that like, I don't want to know, so I'm not going to ask these questions because I might have to change things. And yeah, you might, and that's hard. So thank you, Lindsay. Other thoughts on policies or procedures that you think may or may not work, or focuses? Would love to. You can raise your hand. You can unmute. Scribes can share.
So I'm going to jump in again. Again, I've got the notes in front of me, but this was something Keisha shared, and I know she's having trouble with her audio. But she really had a great example of what they're doing in their organization, is that when people are hired, they give them a little bit of money. It's only $200. They have a grant to do this. And it's used to pay for things like a car repair, or for gas, or childcare, or rent. And, if you think about it, just that little bit of money may make the difference for somebody being able to come to work. And I really thought that was a great thing to do without a huge investment. If you hire 10 employees, that's $2,000, and it's just the little things, that the barriers when we think about, when gas prices were so high a couple of weeks ago, and, many places are in rural areas, or you've got to commute in. So if you had some extra gas money, I see some nods there. I don't know if anybody wants to add on to that, or Keisha, if you want to put anything in the chat.
I'll also say to that point, thank you, Diane, and Keisha, because I think those are really, really good points. And I'll say that how do those things work? What do we know about those things? Well, first of all, yeah, they just functionally help people meet their basic needs, right? That's your number one thing. But they also serve as a symbol and as a reciprocity thing, which means like it signals our respect for you, our appreciation for you. I think one of the things that is important to remember, and it can be hard sometimes the more separate we get from that, is that oftentimes you don't get paid until after you've worked a month, but your rent and stuff is required before, right? Like the beginning of the month before you've incurred any of those services, right? And that happens with a lot of things. Car notes are often the first of them, and it ends up being often a month lag. I mean, even that for me, when I took my first job and I went from student to faculty member, my income went up a lot, but I went like 6 weeks with getting no money at all. And I'm like, I had to move, I had to do all these sort of things. And I was fortunate to have credit cards to put stuff on, right? But not everybody has that or family help or any of that. And it can be very hard to make that transition because just the startup cost of it all, right? We don't think of it that way, can feel very daunting. So that's a really great point. And sometimes those are actually small accommodations, but they're big for the person, right, that you're doing, which I think is great. Other things? Do we want to do a Mentimeter final share out here, Diane?
Yeah, let's do it.
That? Okay. So what we're going to do, it's the exact same Mentimeter code and stuff as before, but what we're going to do here is basically, so all of you who have been sharing in chat or hearing, you can essentially, put one thing in here that you think you can do, or that you want to try to think about doing, or an idea we haven't talked about yet. And what's so nice about this is then we can see it in all of this format. So you get one big takeaway to walk away with at the end of today's session while you're waiting for us to kind of reach back out to you about some things. Extended EAP. Oh, that's a great idea. Building trust in our teams. Right. I love the word trust. We were talking about that in our breakout room. Great word. Stay interviews. I've already put that down in I'm going to be telling all my students about stay interviews. Employee assistance programs, EAP is great. Other things. It's nice to be able to kind of see. I know sometimes it's hard to speak up or know what you want to share. But it's also nice, I think, to put in writing something you want to try to work on, right? Something you want to try to think about doing. Onboarding. I think, Diane, we're going to do a whole other thing on onboarding, because there's a lot of stuff on onboarding and training and development, career development that I think have come up in these rooms. Build connections and appreciation. Yes. Connections. People have been feeling very isolated and lonely lately, even in groups. And so thinking about that, just the acknowledgement of it, I do think is an important thing. Be empathetic. Oh, empathy. My favorite. Mentorship programs. This is great. Mentoring. Awesome. Other things? These are great. Anything else? I'm going to share. Thank you, everybody who shared already. Thank you. As much flexibility as possible. This is important. And I'll say this as someone, because this is my whole sort of focus. It can be hard to see that if you're not a company that can offer remote work, right? It's just not the type of work that you have. It can hard to be like, oh, that's nice for you to say, because I'm dealing with the fact that I can't offer remote work and people want it. And when I hear people talk about that, which I think is important, it's important to recognize that while people may not be able to work remotely, you can still offer more autonomy and control over certain components of the job, over scheduling, over certain things. There are always ways that you can put more control back in the hands of your employees. And so it's important, I think, though, to make the case as to why coming into the office is important if your employees feel like it's your judgment, right? And so I'm always like, make the affirmative case. Like, if you need people to come in and be connected, then don't just say, because I said so. It doesn't work on our kids, doesn't work on our employees. Final thoughts here? Anybody want to share? These are great. Thank you all so much for your generosity and sharing, both in our groups and on Mentimeter today. Diane, final. Do we have any final slides?
We do. We have 2 slides, so don't, but the slide may be of most interest here. Let's see. Oh my goodness. I got to remember
I
how
put
to
you on
work.
the spot.
Nope, that's okay. I just have to remember how to work Zoom.
Problems.
But you guys,
Remote work problems, right?
I'm not sharing screen. Now I'm sharing screen. So, we wanted to wrap up because, most of you came because you wanted to walk away with some ideas. We invited you because we wanted to learn what you're doing and what we needed to know. So, but we also knew that we wanted to give you some suggestions. And I thought the discussion had a great one. But, we come from the university side of thing. And what's the research show? What really works? And so I'm going to let Beth take over and kind of talk about some of the things that we know work.
Yeah, and I've woven, I guess is the word, a little of this into our conversation so far, but I do want to give you all, if you all can take a picture of the slide, you can keep it or whatever. I think it does a nice job of summarizing, and we've kind of worked some of your all's insights into this as well. So what are some strategies that we know from research on the psychology of humanity and in workplaces? What do we want to focus on? I think the first here is try to find ways that you can cede control back to your employees where possible. That can be over autonomy over your job, flexible work arrangements where possible, but it doesn't have to be remote work for your employees to feel like they have more control over how they're doing their jobs. It doesn't have to be control over where they do their jobs for them to feel like they have more control. The second is to provide a safe and healthy workplace. That includes tangible benefits and resources. Brad's point was a good one, that you don't always know the importance of benefits until you need them. But there are tangible things that people can see and use. And oftentimes these are, these are things like childcare. We've been seeing many more organizations thinking about, resources around childcare because of what a big issue it is and what a big barrier it is for people reentering the workplace in terms of cost. That also includes professional development. Again, make the affirmative case as to why this is a place that you want to be. It's also important. I mean, Lauren brought up, management and the importance and critical nature of management. And so did Lindsay, that role modeling by senior leaders is really important. Senior leaders set the tone and the culture. It's not enough to say these nice, pretty words. You have to follow them up. And if you say, we care about your health and well-being, but your senior leadership never takes vacations, the people get promoted, or the people who, you will see, your employees will see what you're doing more than what you're saying. And also you want to be as transparent as possible in this. I don't know why it is that I see companies who are we're hesitant to share everything. The more, the better. We do know that there's something called a realistic job preview. It makes companies less attractive in recruitment, but it increases retention. These people can, we call it pre-coping. They cope ahead of time with the stresses they know that are coming for jobs, and they're less likely to leave when those stresses then inevitably come up. Fairness. This is a lot of that transparency in realistic job previews, but also in the policies and procedures around pay, around performance appraisal. Don't leave it as a big black box of question mark as to how people get paid in your organization. Make it very clear. How can I move up? If you're not a place that can offer a whole lot of raises, well, make it very clear what your career path in this organization can be. Give people an opportunity to see how they fit in here and be transparent around there. And when you're making decisions, provide opportunities for your employees to give feedback, because they feel like in that way it's more fair, and they feel like that you respect them when you ask for their input. This is a big thing that I when I go and I talk to managers, when I train managers, it's the simplest thing, and yet the thing that so many managers fall short on, which is show respect and compassion for your workplace, for your workers, for your coworkers, for your employees. This is through your daily interactions and through more formal things like rewards. Recognition. The reason employee recognition, you see all that sort of stuff, is because it works, because people want to feel appreciated and noticed and acknowledged for all the hard work that has come in. One of the things that I saw backfire a lot were companies that all during COVID were saying, we're so appreciative of you. You're doing so great. You're working so hard. And as soon as things looked safe enough for people to come back into work, it was like, no, we can't have you working. It was like, wait a second, you've just been telling me how great I'm doing. Were you lying to me? Do you respect me or do you not respect me? And that's because companies weren't making an affirmative case as to why we needed to come in. Rather, they were relying on fear and uncertainty to try to move things back to the way things were before, because that's what they understood and that's what they knew. And so when you think about all of these things together, it can help you just as a mental checklist for the policies and procedures you're putting into place. Like, am I trying to cede control to employees where I can? Am I role modeling and providing resources for them? Am I thinking about fairness? And am I demonstrating respect? And if you do those things, you're at least not going to cause more harm in the overall well-being of your employees.
So any questions with that? Kind of summarizes what we've talked about, which is good. It shows that research is aligning with.
We
what
like
we're
that.
doing.
It's always good.
So we're going to go ahead and wrap up. I really want to thank you all for participating. And we're going to send out a survey to see if you like the format or not, if you want to stay on our list to participate. And we're also going to have materials posted on our website here. So this is our healthierworkforcecenter.org. And then you also have Beth's information. Obviously, she's a fabulous resource. And then my contact information too. So please reach out. But we will end there. I will say one of the research projects that's funded through our center with Beth is developing a training for supervisors of remote workers. So if that's something you're interested in, it's being rolled out and pilot tested this year, but definitely shoot us an email. And as we get to the dissemination phase, we'd be happy to share that and the resources with you when the time is right.
I just want to reiterate that, Diane, since you gave me such a great opening for this, which is 2 things of resources that could be helpful to you. First of all, the remote supervisor training is really about training supervisors who are supervising hybrid or remote workers, non-co-located members, to think about productivity and health and well-being at the same time, right? So all this stuff together. Please email me if you're interested, because we will be rolling this out in pilot here in the next 6 months to test its efficacy. And then we will be providing this to folks in the Midwest, of all of you all. And then I also, if your issues that you're identifying your organization lie more in the lines of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that's a big impact in your workforce's well-being or your ability to retain, I do have a book coming out on that called Shared Sisterhood that comes out in October. You can pre-order it now, and we'll have a lot of digital tools that are available with that too, that you can get after the fact or when you order the book, that are about how to work through specific issues of equity in the workplace. And so those are things that you can look forward to in the next couple of months.
And we also have short videos, since we learned that's what people want, 10 to 15 minute videos, and other tools, podcasts that are available. And we have partners who also many of you know, Nebraska Safety Council, St. Louis Area Business Health Coalition, WorkWell Kansas, that are part of our center. So thank you all very, very much. And I will give you 5 minutes back in your day, but have a great rest of your week.
Thank you all so much. Thanks. Been nice to see so many friendly faces.